Most of the graphs and stats in the previous article focused on non-fatal violence. You may counter that by saying that guns are lethal, so obviously, if a gun is involved, the person is going to die, so the majority of gun incidents would be hidden from those statistics. While there is some truth in this, as we mentioned in the last article.
Quote, on average, 71% of homicides were committed with a firearm from 1993 to 2018, end quote.
But it's also quite wrong. Since, from the same report, if we graph the ratio of lethal incidents, i.e. murder, versus all the non-lethal ones, we can see that murder accounts for only a tiny fraction of firearm violence. And it's not even just lots of people surviving with serious injury. Remember from the previous article that the vast majority of the victims of non-fatal firearm violence are completely unharmed. If we overlay that injury distribution on top of the non-fatal portion of this pie chart, we can see the breakdown of how all of this comes together. And here's the previous 25 years, so you don't think I'm cherry-picking. That homicide line is so small that it's really hard to see, so let's drop the non-fatals and look specifically at homicides. Aside from the impressive spike during COVID lockdown, you may also notice that these numbers are quite a bit smaller than some gun control advocates show. This is for a very simple reason. They get larger numbers by combining homicides with suicides as if they are the same thing, and calling it the deceptively generic term of gun deaths. I think it's pretty clear that suicide and murder are completely different things. This graph only shows homicides. However, you may still think that even these numbers are really high, but you have to remember that these are raw totals, not percentages, and they are for the entire United States. The United States population is over 330 million people. Anything that can happen to a person is going to show up a lot when you have that many people running around. For example, a study published in the Journal of Safety Research in 2020, based upon data from the U.S. National Electronic Injury Surveillance System, concluded that from 2007 through 2017, there were an estimated 156,040 patients treated in emergency departments in the U.S. for golf cart-related injuries over the 11-year period, including traumatic brain injuries. So if we divide that out, that comes to an average of 14,185 golf cart injuries treated in hospitals every year. Obviously, these numbers are just research estimates, and we don't have data for all the years, but just to ballpark the numbers, if we add that yearly average to the previous graph, you can see that it's higher than most years of firearm homicide. Let's take it a step further. There are much bigger killers in our society than guns. To put things into context, we'll examine a few. Let's start with car accidents. It may surprise you to know that drunk driving kills roughly the same number of people each year as firearm homicides. The modern culture is so afraid of guns that I find that people are often far more concerned with a drunk person having a gun than a car, and yet, both are equally deadly. Many people are quite convinced that bars should be gun-free zones, and yet I've not heard anyone propose that bars should be car-free zones, requiring their patrons to arrive by public transport or taxi, or that they have a designated driver who must pass a breathalyzer before the group can leave. Or, how about this? Cars are already required to have seat belts, airbags, and other safety features, right? So why not mandate that every car on the road has to have a breathalyzer installed in it that won't let you start the car unless you pass it every single time? It would save thousands of lives, so why not? Don't you care about all the dying and suffering people who are killed or injured by drunk drivers every year? Of course, that's obviously not the case. You can have empathy and still believe that some measures are not worth the benefit. Most people would revolt against such measures at the inconvenience alone, not to mention the other legal implications and practical limitations. Just because something would save lives doesn't necessarily mean that we should do it, nor that the majority of people would be willing to do it, nor that it wouldn't do more harm than good. Let's expand a bit and look at all automobile deaths. You may object that car accidents are accidental, while homicides are intentional, and you'd be right. And to some degree, that is a valid objection. The distinction between deliberate, malicious intent versus accidental harm. However, the point here is simply the existence of a non-essential luxury or convenience which directly results in the deaths of tens of thousands of people every year. This is in response to the common argument against guns, which claims that no one needs a gun. In other words, it is a toy or luxury whose presence results in the deaths of many people each year, and therefore the right to possess it should be revoked, or at least severely restricted. However, the same argument could easily be made against cars. No one needs a car. Our society could easily be restructured such that everyone took public transit, taxis, or restricted their daily activities to locations within walking or biking distance. And yet we don't. Even though this change would save 40,000 lives per year, most people would oppose this quite strongly. But to respond to the previous objection more directly, let's compare like with like. Here is a graph of automobile deaths versus deaths from gun accidents to help you understand just how rare gun accidents actually are. Let's come at this from a different angle, shall we? In 2017, there were 272.5 million highway-class motor vehicles registered in the U.S. In that same year, of the estimated 1,013,000,000 firearms in the world, including civilian, law enforcement, and military, the United States civilian population owned an estimated 393.3 million of them. That means that American civilians own 38.8% of all the guns in the world. But also remember that the U.S. population is only 330 million. In other words, we have more guns than people. Since the data pools are so big, it helps to scale them down to make them easier to comprehend. The common way in which this is done is by calculating the rate, taking the raw totals and converting them into the amount per some number of units, typically 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000. So if we do that here and convert our numbers into per 100,000, we end up with this. Simply by the numbers, cars are far more dangerous than guns. Suicide is another lethal condition that is rapidly increasing, and over the last 25-year period, it has killed more people than all car accidents, and 3 times more people than firearm homicides, 2.95x to be precise. But that's just the people who actually died. Stats for 2022 indicate that while 49,451 people died from suicide in the U.S. that year, 1.6 million Americans attempted suicide. 3.8 million planned a suicide attempt, and 13.2 million seriously considered suicide. As always, for this article's sources, more articles, or to get a copy of the book, visit weepingdragon.com.